Thank you very much. Thank you, Jonathan. I hope everyone can hear. In this short session, I'm going to give you a bit of history about George Mallen, and particularly about a historic work of 1970 called the Eco-Gain that is really not very well known. And as Jonathan mentioned, this is research that's recently been published in my book. So this was the early days of working with digital technology. And as you will see throughout the session, we are still grappling with many of these issues today. So in 1969, George Mallen, one of the co-founders of the Computer Arts Society, wrote, and I quote, "The creative processes of artists are thought to be extremely complex. How may computer technology be harnessed to assist, to inspire, to improve these processes?" Well, Mallen was born in 1939, and he's been involved in creative computing since 1962. And in the early days of his career, he started working with the cybernetician Gordon Pask, and that's what you're looking at here on the screen. And this was Pask's company's System Research. And it was here that he was able to he was really in quite a unique position in that he was able to consider how digital technology that came out of World War II could be harnessed for public good. Now, Mallen's was an optimistic approach to the notion of progress. And he really did believe that societal change could be brought about using technology informed by the principles of cybernetics. And by the way, this is a newly discovered image here. So it's very exciting to see this when he was young, actually in Gordon Pask's office. As far as I know, there aren't very many examples of the inside of system research at this time. So what is cybernetics? Well, it's very loosely described very basically here as the theoretical study of control processes in electronic, mechanical, and biological systems. And you can see here that Norbert Wiener defined it for kind of the post-war period meaning that we use when we talk about cybernetics as a science of communication control in the animal and the machine, or very crucially, particularly for George Mallen, the communication within an observer and between the observer and the environment. So who was Gordon Pask? Well, he was a British cybernetician who had met Wiener at Cambridge. And he founded this sort of cybernetic think tank, System Research. Now, I don't really have time to do justice to Gordon Pask in this talk, but just to sort of say that he called himself a philosopher engineer. And the very important point about Pask is that he wasn't just about theory, he also made things. And these things that he created and made by hand, built from scratch, actually embodied his principles. And this is something that has a great effect on George Mallen throughout his career, as we'll see. So here you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, one of Pask's things that he made, which is called the Musicolor machine from the 1950s. And this was a machine that he built, again from scratch, that really crossed the fields of art, music, performance, and science. And it's probably the first cybernetically inspired performance system in the UK. A very, very early example we're looking at here, 53. This is the machine that controlled the environment, and Pask would sort of play this machine in performances, and it was a light sound generative sort of performance where the machine and the human were pretty much equal. So with the example of cybernetics, the computer could have the potential to be more than just a design tool. It could actually be an agent for allowing interactivity and the ability to connect more closely with the audience. And of course, it's also a medium for simulation. So it was with Gordon Pask that Mallen began to use digital simulation to model the human thought process and to try and consider how the digital can be used as a simulation of the mind. However, this was not an immediately apparent pathway, and it was certainly not easy. And it was something that Mallen worked on for most of his career. So Pask's conversation theory had an impact on Mallen. And here you can see a kind of embodiment of the Pask idea of conversation theory. Conversation theory attempted to explain learning, the learning process in the mind in both living organisms and in machines. And the fundamental idea, and again, here I'm really generalizing, in a very simplistic way. The fundamental idea of conversation theory is that learning occurs through conversations about a subject, which then serves to make the knowledge explicit. So it's again about conversations within the knowledge system, with the observer, within the observer, and the knowledge system and feedback. So it's a very cybernetic inspired idea. Again, one of the things that Pask did was actually make things which embodied his ideas, and you can see that here at Cybernetic Serendipity, which was at the Institute of Contemporary Art in London in '68, a very famous show, wherein he exhibited an interactive artwork called Colloquy of Mobiles. And that's it sort of hanging there from the ceiling. So this was a precursor to what we might call today's artificial intelligence systems. And it consisted of male and female robotic figures. You can see them hanging down from an array on the ceiling. And they interacted with each other, and they reacted to the audience, and they learned as they did so, and they fed back information between each other and between the audience. And they attempted to reach a state of agreement, what Pask called a state of agreement, sort of idea of homeostasis, a cybernetic concept. And Mallen had what he says is a small role to play in this work, in that he helped bring it to cybernetic serendipity and helped set it up, and ran about like crazy during the run of the show, trying to make sure that it worked. So in the wake of cybernetic serendipity, the Computer Arts Society was founded, and this is late 1963, and we call it CAS for short. And here you can see the original, in the background, the original blue leaflet that explained the proposal for the society and its aims and objectives. And I'm also showing you an example of one of the issues of Page. Page was a journal, a bulletin that they published pretty much every month in the early days. This is number 4, edited by Gustav Metzger, who we'll mention again in a moment. Yes, it was, in the days before the internet, the Computer Arts Society was a really important place to learn, to network with like-minded people. And occasionally there was even opportunities for exhibitions and funding. So the founders of the society, along with George Mallen, were John Lansdowne, who is an architect who had an interest in early computer-aided design systems. And he also had interest in generative dance, as we'll see in a moment. And Alan Sutcliffe, who was a programmer with an interest in computer-generated text, art, and performance. And it was basically founded to explore the possibilities of using computers in a creative context. And this was a desire to promote creative computing in all the art forms, which is why it is named with arts plural in the title, Computer Arts. And in my own work, when I write about this subject, I very frequently, in fact, almost always use the term computer arts, plural, to refer to the 1960s and 70s, really almost up into the 1980s, because this is the term that was used by the Computer Arts Society. As you probably all come to realize, if you have any interest in this field whatsoever, terminology becomes very, very a big issue and is debated endlessly, often in the pages of the Page magazine. This idea of an understanding of cybernetics that allows a previously hitherto degree of collaborative meaning making in art is something that obviously continues with the Computer Arts Society today. Now, it was based in London, but it had an international reach. There were members in Europe, North and South America, and Japan. And even in 1970, there was one member in Australia. And again, in the days before the internet, this was really quite important way for dissemination of information and for meeting people from whom you could not only learn, but you could discuss these interesting and new concepts. Now, one issue that was becoming very clear to CAS at the time was the implications of the role of the artist in the computational age. So, would the artist of the future have any role at all? And in fact, is the artist going to be amplified or superseded by the computer? And this was a very pertinent question asked by 2 early CAS members, Stroud Cornock and Ernest Edmonds, who were at the University of Leicester, and they gave a very prescient paper in 1970, which was subsequently published in Leonardo journal in 73, I believe it was. And here you can see them on the screen, Stroud Cornock and Ernest Edmonds, another example of Ernest Edmonds down here. And they argued that the artist could, in fact, have a greatly amplified role, one that was integrated with societal concerns, And in order to achieve that, they would use the exact materials and methods of the technological society in which they found themselves. So using the methods and material and digital basically as a method and a material, you could then have a greater impact on the society, and you would no longer be, or the idea was that you would not be superseded, you would indeed be amplified. And here is one of their artworks that they are using as a sort of example of the paper that they produced, and it's called Data Pack. And down here in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see the object which was produced from the conversation that the two artists had through the machine. So it was quite a simple art piece, really, but its importance was that it was doing something which was very, very, very new at this time. And the record of the conversation that the artists had was produced in a pack of data that you could then take away with you. So these questions, of course, will the artist be amplified or superseded? These questions are still being debated today, particularly with AI art. Now, the first exhibition of the Computer Art Society was Event 1 in 1969 at the Royal College of Art. And just as a little aside, the last time I was at EVA was literally 2009, wherein I gave a paper called the 40th anniversary of Event 1. And we're now, what are we at, 55 years of Event 1. Anyhow, the moral of the message is I should come to EVA more often. Anyway, this was an interdisciplinary show, as you can see here, and it really heralded the future direction of the society, which was a culture of sharing and cooperation that was at the heart of the CAS ethos. So you can see that it included all kinds of art forms, hence the emphasis on the plural arts. And artists and programmers cooperated to create work working with machines, which was still a very new concept in the UK at this time. Now, needless to say, this was entirely outside of the established mainstream art world of dealers, auction houses, West End galleries, and so on. But they managed to get to the Royal College of Art through contacts made there. So here are two pictures of the installation of the show, and you can see on the left-hand side that there's quite a lot of plotter drawings and 2D works on paper, line printer drawings. And then on the lower right there, you've got the only photograph that I can find of the stage of Event 1. Because of course, there was quite a lot of performance in addition to works on paper. So CAS members really believed in a positive human-machine interrelationship, and they believed that this would be made visible through art. So here are some of the things that you would have seen at Event 1. So we've got John Lansdowne's on the lower left there, work with computer choreographed dance notations. And you can see he's sitting at his teletype, and he is working here with students from the Royal Ballet School. Above that is a still from the Tony Pritchett Flexipede film of 1967. This was the first fully computer animated film made in Britain. Opposite that, we have Gustav, on the top right, we have Gustav Metzger's sculptural model for his mammoth proposal 5 screens with computer. And in the lower right there, you've got a shot that I found in the Evening Standard, which is showing a performance of John Lansdowne's computer choreographed sword fight. And I just love the way that this fellow's glasses are flying off his face as they go through motions that were dictated by the computer. So after this, George Mallen went on to lead the cooperative project EcoGame. So what was EcoGame? Well, it was an interactive multimedia computer-controlled simulation, and this modeled an economic system. So it's a very early example of computing technology used in a large-scale installation, and it created a simulated environment with the theme of competition and cooperation. So hence we kind of referred to it as a game. Many CAS members worked on it, and about 25 CAS members, in fact, including Tony Pritchett and Ernest Edmonds, who you saw previously, and John Lansdowne. And it dealt with opportune issues of ecology and environment. So hence the name EcoGame, referred to economics, ecology, and environment. And it was the first digitally driven multiplayer interactive gaming system in the UK. So when I say game, we're talking about a sense of a simulated environment in which participants make behavioral choices that have cybernetic concepts of feedback and control at its heart. And here you can see on the top right, you've got top left, sorry, you've got a schematic drawn by John Lansdowne showing that it was going to be displayed in a dome. And on the lower right, you've actually got a picture of the work installed in its geodesic dome. It was exhibited at the Olympia exhibition halls for about a week in October 1970, and it was part of a computer trade fair. And CAS was approached by this trade fair to ask if they would produce a centerpiece for the exhibition. And indeed, that's what it did. And it was played by approximately 5,000 people. So players played by forming teams of 9 separate people or separate teams. And this was about separately allocating your resources in a way which, in some sense, maximized your team's private satisfactions, and the computer aggregated the environmental impact of these decisions and translated them into visual terms. So what we're seeing here is the visuals on the lower right, which is from a bank of 720 35-millimeter slides. And these were showing photographs of the general state of the simulation, the level of affluence in the economic model that was under the control of the players, and also the relevant prosperity or effectiveness of those individual players. So the basic idea was that your decisions had an impact on the entire simulated environment of the game. So the players' decisions were determined which slides were shown on overhead screens. And here's a couple examples of 2 of the slides. So the computer-controlled slide projectors could access any particular slide within seconds. And all of these slides, all 720 of them, were sourced from CAS members. So a call went out saying, can you please send in images that you may have or that you might photograph yourself with a SRL lensed camera, of course. And all of these slides were collated and sent in, and they show various images which would be pertinent to the game. So scenes of prosperity, or scenes of degradation. So if the game in a social sense, in this example, was not operating well, you would have perhaps a slide like the one on the top left come up, which is a kind of, I don't know, 18th century version of some hideous medical thing going on. But if the game was operating well from a social point of view, then you might have a slide like the one on the lower right, which shows a modern for 1970 medical teams at work. So as you can see here, actually, I'll just mention that the system was entirely built from scratch, that all the hardware had to be sourced and assembled and then hand coded. So this was a live interaction over a network. All of the terminals, they used Tektronix terminals. They were all linked to a remote time sharing computer. And it was using technology that had never been put together in such a way before. This was a very impressive feat for 1970. And as you can see by this nice little pen and ink drawing by John McNulty, it combined elements of both ecology and economics. And these were 2 issues that were of very great concern to its creators, particularly with reference to the oil industry and to pollution, and how both ecology and economics are going to impact human decision-making. So you could adopt a position in the game that was very profitable for you personally, but that was very harmful for society or for ecology, at which point it would be very unbalanced and you would end up having lost. Or you could adopt a game that was very, very beneficial for the environment and was marvelous for society, lots of big pictures of smiling school children, but that ruined the economy because it was too expensive to operate. So it was a very interesting example of how our decisions as humans and our prejudices, perhaps, that are latent within us, actually go towards indicating how we make a system and how that system functions. So this was really about interactive digital art being a force for positive change. Mallen believed that if you could get people to understand their role, their position, their ability to make decisions and what that impact would have, that this would make society a better place. So after being shown in London, it toured to the first European Management Symposium in Davos in 1971. This was the forerunner of the World Economic Forum. So in other words, the very first Davos international meeting that took place. And it was in a slightly different format there. So there was no more geodesic dome. Instead, we had, as you can see on the lower left there, people sitting sort of at desks. And on the top here, we've got a, I'll get rid of that. Let me go back. We've got a nice drawing, which I only recently discovered on the top right, which is a collage that George Mallen put together, setting out the space that he was given by the people in Davos and seeing how he could fit his equipment in there. So it was a slightly different setup, as I said. Teams of players were given briefings beforehand. And this is because the concept of a digitally driven behavioral decision-making game such as this was so entirely new that it actually had to be explained to the people who were participating, which I think is astonishing for us in 2024 to conceive of that. But there literally is a pack of information which, you know, I've researched that told people how to do it, what it was, and how to do it. So there were 450 delegates from 31 countries, including chief executives and senior managers from the top companies in Europe. And there were 50 faculty members from business schools in the United States. And all of these people were playing the game. In fact, Stafford Beer, who was a famous British pioneer in cybernetics, saw EcoGame, and as a result, he was able to utilize the slide projection technology, which again was completely groundbreaking, as part of the support infrastructure for a proposal that he was working on for the Salvador Allende government in China. And this is what's known as his Project CyberSyn.
Chile, not China.
Sorry, I misread that, Chile. Yeah, Chile. Anyway, sadly, it was never completed because it was abandoned in 1973 after there was government issues and a coup in Chile. However, this is a mock-up room which he produced, and you can see that the idea of sitting in a simulated environment, an enclosed sort of separate situation, making decisions using computers was something that he took from the EcoGame. And this is, again, something that's not very well known. Well, the power of EcoGame lay in its output as a graphic qualitative interpretation rather than numerical interpretation of what was happening to the economy in the game. And in the 60s, Mallen saw that the techniques of simulation were emerging as powerful new aids to decision-making and planning. And with the example of cybernetics, the computer could have the potential to be more than just a design tool. It could actually be an agent for enabling interactivity and the ability to connect more closely to the audience. And therefore, it can become a very powerful medium for simulation. So it was designed to showcase the unique characteristics of computing, which is the algorithmic possibilities that it has. And it required its participants to consider issues of behavior, communication, and control. But where did some of these ideas come from? Well, at Systems Research, Mallen had met Stephen Willits. Stephen is an artist who was interested in cybernetics and was beginning to consider the ways that systems could be applied to art and how behavior could affect art. And here you've got an example of Stephen Willits's Edinburgh Model Social Construction Project, which was produced for the Computer Art Society exhibition Interact in 1973. In fact, it was Willits who was Mallen's introduction to the art world. And they met in the early 60s at Systems Research. And they had a lot in common and much exchange took place between them. Willits founded his publication Control in 1965, and Mallen wrote for this magazine, as well as giving a lecture to Willits's initiative in Gallery House, the Center for Behavioral Art. And a recording from 1973 of Mallet's giving a lecture there has been located and transcribed for the first time in this book. So we thank Stephen Willits very much for that. Willits wrote, there are two primary issues of the word control that exist. Number one, a system determines the behavior of another, i.e. a state of social determinism. Number two, a system determines its own behavior, i.e. social self-determinism. He was writing about this in 1965. So these are two concepts that are rooted in cybernetics and that Mallen and Willits both very much believed in and that showed up later in EcoGame. Well, there was a paper presented by Gustav Metzger, and again, a very early CAS member, at Data Fair in 1969. And this was just a year before EcoGame came out. And you're seeing here one of his computer drawings for 5 screens with computer, a big project which sadly was never realized due to its extreme size and cost. However, it does demonstrate Metzger's interest in social responsibility. And it also references what was to become one of the major premises behind EcoGame. And Metzger wrote, "The artist, by involving himself with the present productive process, by assimilating the new skills and knowledge, by mastering the language, is placing himself in a position where he can interact with and eventually affect the world in which he lives." And Metzger concludes very hopefully in this paper from 1969 by asking that the Computer Arts Society establish a team of people who will use the terminal for programming social problems. Well, this is in fact what did happen with EcoGame the next year. However, what this exact form would take was discussed by CAS members. And here you can see a proposal by Roger Saunders, a drawing. Roger Saunders, again, an early CAS member. At this time, he was a student. And he produced this idea based on what an economy is. And you can see, again, the great influence of cybernetics here, with lots of different inputs, including profits, wages, goods going in to households, and revenue and labor coming out. And some elements of this did make it into the final version. Again, this is something that has been recovered from the CAS archive that hasn't been seen in public since it was conceived. So evaluation, modification, these are two concepts that interested Mallen and that he carried on to his subsequent career at the Royal College of Art in the 1970s. And it was here that he made computing an increasingly mainstream activity at the RCA. Stephen Boyd Davis has very kindly written a chapter for my book about Mallen's time at the RCA, which contains entirely new research. And here you can see an example of the computer activities unit that Mallen set up. This picture is from around 1979 and showing some of the machines and some of the work that's being produced on it. Stephen Boyd Davis wrote, "Mallen's engagement with human-computer interaction as a dynamic relationship between users and machines was ahead of its time." And here he drew on Gordon Pask's integrated worldview. And a quote that we found from a 1972 design report written at the Royal College of Art. And I'll just read the quote, which we assume is Mallen's view or his name. He's named as one of the authors of this report. "One cannot validate the usefulness or otherwise of a project by the exclusive use of a single criterion, e.g. cost-benefit ratios. Since what might be a resounding success to the accountant could prove disastrous to the environmentalist." Well, these are words that very much resound with the premise of the EcoGame, and it was precisely this that the EcoGame was attempting to address. So I think I've probably finished a little bit early. So I can either donate the time to the room. Actually, I will just tell you before I leave about the 2 books. The Computer in the Art that I made on, which is on the left here, which is from 2008. It's available as an ebook, and the new book is on the right-hand side there, Creative Simulations. And hopefully you can stay this evening and hear a little bit more about the book and meet some of George Mallen's family. Unfortunately, George himself is not very well at the moment. He's in his middle 80s. And do follow me on the socials because I do post quite a lot about the history on there as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, we do have time for questions, so if anyone's got any questions they want to ask, please feel free.
Very speedy.
Yeah.
I was a bit worried that I wouldn't get through everything, so.
Is there a repository, thank you for this excellent overview of the works that you mentioned in a sort of movie at least, or even interactive sort of?
There's no movie of the EcoGame in process, sadly, no. You know, even it's a reminder that even an SLR camera. Shooting film in those days was expensive and not everybody had one. There are a few color photographs, which I tried to show you. There are some black and white ones, but there's not a huge amount of material remaining. Sadly, they did not make a movie. However, some of this work is in the repository of the Computer Arts Society archive, which Sean Clark, our chair, will tell you more about later. And you can find some of that material on the Computer Arts Society website.
I'm glad you mentioned the colloquy of mobiles, the work by that maverick genius that you were describing. Before I say more, I should say I'm probably the only person here who did go to the Serendipity exhibition in '68. Maybe there were a few others, but but not many. And of course, it was even then it made a huge impression, which I think it's the reason I'm here, for instance, because I went to that
I
exhibition.
didn't know that. You can write a paper on.
But what I wanted to mention is that, which I think you know, that colloquy has now been reproduced in Detroit. I've never seen it there, but with new electronics, so it works a bit better than it did in '68. It now exists, and you can actually see that amazing talking machine.
I think it was completely remade. By some students, yeah, it was a great
Yeah.
project. There's videos of that online.
Are there any other projects to recreate some of them?
Some of Gordon's thing or some of Mallen's thing.
I mean, Sean Clark does some of these things.
There's not been any move to recreate the eco game, but I mean, it'd be possible. You could simulate it in a computer, probably fairly straightforward. We do not have the 720 slides remaining, however. I did manage to find a few of them, a few of the pictures that were used, and I put them in the book. But I guess the 720 slides just got dissipated or got moved back to the people who loaned them.
Well, so they are just physical, ordinary slides.
They were physical, ordinary slides,
Yeah.
and I did photograph some of
Yeah.
them, yeah, because they were computer-controlled slide projectors, and it was the first time that these had been used in Europe. They
Right.
got them specially from a company in Europe, and the system was able to grab any slide within seconds. It was astonishing. So that as soon as you made your decision, it bummed up above your head what it was. So a picture of crying children, for example, an oil spill in the sea, for example, or a picture of laughing children or people being educated, whatever.
Any other questions, comments?
Well, I'm here, so you can.
Yes,
speak to
so
me
yes,
later.
Catherine, are you here all week? or just
I'm
today?
here all day and I'm
Okay.
back on Thursday.
Okay, so, but you do come to the evening session because Catherine will give a short, more informal talk then. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.